So it's my pleasure also to welcome Nils Bergman, who as a Swedish citizen has traveled a lot and is coming from South Africa, as you know, and Nils is an expert in kangaroo mother care, immediate kangaroo mother care that is as implemented in South Africa, and actually he has with Beyond Westrup very interesting and very nice research project at a global level, and we are looking forward to this project. But today we know that kangaroo mother care is supporting bonding, breastfeeding, but also sleep-wake cycling. And today he will talk about pleasurable feeding and sleeping, a physiological rhythm for premature infants. So thank you very much, Nils.
Thank you very much indeed. Can you hear me? Thank you, Jeff. Jeff talks about deep time, but wouldn't you agree that he has a deep brain? I first saw this name, Alberts, in 1996 in a paper when I came straight out of darkest Africa to explain these very things. It's been a pleasure listening to you, sir. And even further, Sophia, you're still here. This is part of a wonderful presentation. Thank you very, very much. You may find some of the things I'm going to say difficult. And I want to say this, and thank you very much for your words. And they mean very much. And I will hope that this will help all of us understand some of this. So let me go straight into pleasurable. It's wonderful. How very scientific is pleasure? Thank you, Stina. Very, very good. Actually, in a sense, pleasurable and physiological are the same synonym. I want to start by making this connection in your brain. Are you okay? If it's physiological, it's pleasurable. Actually, physiology precedes pleasure. This is part of the nurture science we want to talk about. Then the second thing to say is that physiology is rhythmic. It comes in rhythms. It comes in patterns. And so the very common pattern that we all know is the circadian rhythm, the day-night cycle, where the sun works through the light, the eye, and there's a you don't have to remember these names. All of these slides will be available to you. Suprachiasmatic nucleus. Forget. And the pineal gland makes melatonin, makes the day-night cycle. And this drives all sorts of mechanisms, systems in your body. Is regulated by the circadian rhythm. And it's a master clock, Zeitgeber. Is that Zeitgeber? Zeitgeber? German? It's a master clock. There you are. Zeitgeber. I've got to get this right. I've only seen it written otherwise. And so the master clock. But there are many other clocks. And so the master clock runs a number of peripheral clocks. And so the metabolism, you've heard the beginning of metabolism and ingestion. So thank you, Jeff, it's coming. Following from this is the clock and the rhythms that control these things. And so the master clock, the peripheral clocks, they live, can we make the lights darker? But maybe you can't see me because let's leave them like that. Hypothalamic area, the limbic brain, are a place where these clocks live. And you will see that there are other clocks. I want to see myself what it says here, if you'll excuse me putting on my glasses. What does it say? The feeding clock here. And food is in itself a clock, a Zeitgeber, that may have preceded light. There's no light for the fetus that's developing, and so food is also a regulator of these rhythms. Jeff mentioned hunger and satiety. They have rhythmic clocks. And they are drivers of the metabolism. And so all the different parts here are regulated by clocks which are ultradian, meaning less than 24 hours. they are entrained, managed, and controlled in a synchronized way with the master clock. And so hypothalamic local clocks communicate and coordinate. And so Sophia mentioned that she was asked to talk about feeding. But hello, the first thing she says, what's that in relationship to everything else? And so here you will see ultradian and circadian rhythms of sleep-wake and food intake. Here are two particular totally separate systems that are regulated by totally separate clocks, but they are synchronized. So there is the title, Pleasurable Feeding and Sleeping. So this is actually the message of my presentation. Feeding and sleeping are inseparable. They are part of the same, and I want to elaborate this, and I hope I will finish so that you have tea. And you won't have a sleep, but you will have tea. So, the feeding clock, where and what and how long is that? Bit of problem there, but the sleeping clock we know very well. This is well documented, and it starts here, and some of this has been done here in Stockholm, but I haven't taken out all the references. But Mark Scher measured very carefully the sleep cycle, and it's 68 minutes with a very great variation. And so a mean cycle duration was determined at 25 weeks gestation age. It's already there, way before birth. And in this very group of babies that we're discussing in this meeting, there is a sleep cyclicity reflecting ultradian biological rhythms in the early stages of brain development. If you gave me another hour, I would talk to you about brain wiring. Sleep cycling is the actual driver for brain wiring. Acquisition of information, consolidation of information, memory formation is all regulated by a sleep cycle. Specific steps of development takes place at particular parts of that sleep cycle. It's not how much quiet sleep you have which is important and how much non-REM and REM sleep you have. It's that you cycle them in a smooth, cyclical, rhythmic, ultradian rhythm. And so the receptors, pathways, memory, everything hinges on a sleep cycle. That sleep cycle is about an hour. This figure 68 is actually usually looked at a bit less. If you split that 100 and there were two of them inside there, you would get about 50 minutes as a sleep cycle. So that sleep duration has a specific center in the brain that controls it, and even in a couple of slides that I picked out and referenced, you'll see that feeding and sleep-wake cyclicity is coming from the same part of the brain. And here's another picture. Feeding and sleep-wake cycle are peripheral clocks that are synchronized. These peripheral tissue clocks are synchronized through humoral nutrient and autonomic wiring. Central pacemaker, yes, and peripheral clocks. So, sleeping and feeding is a single physiological rhythm. I don't know that you quite get this at this point. Are we okay? But if I'm saying something that is different, I would like to make this. Sophia, you started helping me on the way. So, what is the circadian rhythm? Yes, we know that it's there. It is not there in the preterm infant. The preterm infant doesn't have no idea about the day and the night. And you do not need to be a mother of a preterm infant to know that. A full-term baby is born, and it doesn't care if it's day or night. It is not driven by the circadian rhythm. Only at 8 weeks or so does cortisol start getting into a rhythm which is reflecting the circadian. Melatonin a week later, temperature changes after that, and there is the H3F3B gene on a buccal swab that you can detect that caused the circadian rhythm to be expressed. Interestingly, it doesn't matter if you're born at 30 weeks or if you're born at 40 weeks, 8 weeks later you will express the circadian rhythm. So it takes 8 weeks for the sun to get through to make the message. So the emergence of adrenocortical circadian function, this is the title of a paper, in newborns and infants, and its relationship to sleep, feeding, and maternal adrenocortical activity. It's the interaction with the mother, which is the provider, supporter of feeding and sleeping, which is the triangle. It wasn't a straight story, as Jeff says. The story has got several parts to it, and I can't tell you each one in a straight line that we all like to do in our reductionist society. But the point I want to make is that emergence of circadian rhythm follows well-established prior rhythms that were in place before. This particular study shows at birth, there's no rhythm at all. A couple of babies have got it at 5 months. Most have got it at 7 months. And so then we say, what's normal? Every baby should be sleeping through the night at 6 months. That's an average. It's totally normal to do it at 3 months, and it's totally normal to do it at 12 months. Because there's this huge variability in how it is expressed. And so this 1 hour sleep cycle at 3 months might block together into 2 sleep cycles, or it might not. And then there is a adult sleep pattern, and the early part of the night has quiet sleep, and there's REM sleep. I'm going to these are just to emphasize adult sleep and newborn sleep is totally different. Has totally different needs and drivers behind it. Again, Jeff, we know it's like that, and then all these papers talk about how do you get the proper adult rhythm, and not why do you have it? Why do we have this non-adult rhythm? It's there for a reason. And so, in adults, sleep pertains to memory. In children, in newborn, sleep pertains to making the capacity for memory. It is the neurodevelopment itself which is first necessary. And then you have the capacity to learn the day and the night on top of that. So, sleeping. I don't think there's any doubt that we have 1 hour sleep-wake cycles. What is the evidence for feed cycles? How often do you, where you work and in here, feed babies? I've asked this question for very many years. In terms of the answer to the question, what evidence is there? I was able to find a technical review from the WHO. There should be no better authority. There is very clear statements about breast mother's own milk, and you expressed it beautifully, and how to give it is nicely described individually and so on. How often to give it? There is no evidence at all. I think that's astonishing. I think that's amazing. So why do we give it 2 hourly? Well, standard practice in many countries is 3 hourly and 4 hourly, and that's what we do. And it says babies tolerate it. Tolerate it. Did you get my subtle inference? And so there are no randomized controlled trials because nobody did the studies. Nobody is actually tested to see is this actually so. And so let me nevertheless share some facts. There aren't any trials. Are we okay? Part of Stina's comment here was we're going to do some trials after this ultra early meeting. So here's one of them. Perhaps somebody out there would like to pick this up. How do we make these facts into a trial? So, feeding frequency. If I have a very big stomach, then I can put a lot in there once or twice a day. If I have a very small stomach, I need to put less in there more often. So there's an inverse relationship to stomach volume. Now, stomach volume I can objectively measure. So, would you agree that this is a feeding interval relationship to stomach volume? So, when we give 3 hourly to a full-term normal baby, it's 60 milliliters approximately. Okay? So, what is the size of this full-term baby's stomach? What is the stomach volume of the neonate? I am not, just like Jeff, showing you the actual research of all of these. I have it. But here is a summary slide. By ultrasound, by chemical methods, some of them done right here in Stockholm, California, and autopsies. The stomach size of the baby at term is 20 milliliters. Even when you blow it up with a balloon. What is the stomach of the premature? I need to make this point at this early stage, where we are talking about small babies. When you look at ultrasound, stomach size is growing. It's absolutely linear. So I want to suggest as a very simple statement that the capacity of a normal neonate, regardless of its weight, is 7 milliliters per kilogram. A kilogram baby, 7 milliliters of stomach. This requires that we give the baby hourly volumes, hourly feeds. 20 milliliter hourly feeds. No evidence, still just some facts. Here's a fact. A single milk ejection reflex from a mother, when the baby suckles on the breast for a couple of minutes, has a particular rhythm, and then it swallows. It swallows 20 milliliters from a single milk ejection reflex. And that's not related to the size of the breast. It can be a D cup, an A cup. The mammary glands inside that breast are exactly the same number. And so it doesn't matter. It produces 20 milliliters. And so when you swallow 20 milliliters of a solid meal, it'll empty in 2 hours. Soup will empty in half an hour, but milk curdles to cheese, and it empties exactly in 1 hour. I mentioned the stomach size earlier. The mammalian feeding frequency. So yes, it's got a big stomach, but now the mother puts into that big stomach 16 grams per liter of fat and protein content. And that's twice a day. This puppy or kitten, nesting animals generally, 4 hourly feeds and a lower concentration. The zebra here that is following its mother can follow and feed more frequently. These are different categories of mammalian care. And so the fourth one is the carry care. The baboon has 2 grams per liter in his milk, but the baby's there constantly eating 1 every hour. What is the human milk protein fat content? It's 1 gram. There is only enough fat and protein to last for less than an hour. And that protein in particular is non-protein nitrogen that is almost immediately utilized, small pieces of pre-protein material that is rapidly used by the gut and needs replacing every hour. More circumstantial facts. The metabolism. Lactose is our normal way of eating, and we have lactase. You left out the lactase when I read your paper, but you did very well. He thinks deeply. So there's more to this. But lactose is what we get. Now, if I'm feeding 1 hourly, I have enough lactose. If I'm fed 4 hourly, after 90 minutes, my lactose has run out. But it's not a problem. I have glycogen in my liver. And so I can start glycogenolysis. And after 3 hours, things are not so good. I have brown fat between my shoulder blades. I can use that. And I maintain normal glycemic levels very perfectly. But notice, glycogenolysis requires sympathetic activation. In terms of physiology, glycogenolysis is evidence of not pleasurable. And once I'm burning fat, I'm using stores for disaster times. So in a very broad sense, you're familiar with the concept of the allostatic state, when you're in a stress state and you change into a hyper metabolic system, you are increasing your allostatic state, you're maintaining allostatic load. And I want to suggest that 4-hourly feeds are putting infants into a diathesis that puts them into becoming thrifty phenotypes. And so we have developmental origins of health and adult disease. Barker, you're familiar with, and the whole hypothesis of the first started with small babies and diabetes. I'm throwing these just to put the picture of you. I'm sure you know about these things, so I'm not explaining them. But specifically, here's an example. This is from the United States, very large number of babies. And so the amount of weight an American, European male gains in the first 7 days of life predicts his obesity when he's 30 years old. And so the fetal programming hypothesis. And coming back to pleasurable. If we're getting a pleasurable physiological behavior, we're not going to see such adaptation from the allostatic load. And so let's stay with stomach anatomy and physiology. I'm becoming more and more circumstantial in my evidence base. Are you still okay? But stay with me now. Let's look at the stomach anatomy and physiology, specifically of the newborn and the preterm. So here is the stomach. This is from Widström and Uvnäs Moberg that you will know very well. And so there is a certain physiology, and one of the particular pieces of that physiology is an amylin peptide. And it comes with insulin, and it inhibits gastric emptying, very specifically. So when food arrives here in the duodenum, insulin is released, but amylin, in the meantime, stops more food from arriving in the duodenum, so that the duodenum can deal with that bolus of food that's come through. And then when that bolus has gone through, the amylin falls, and therefore more food can come through. And so amylin controls in a careful manner the emptying of the stomach in the first hour of life, in the first hour of ingestion. So the food bolus that came through there, what now happens when I give a 2-hourly bolus feed to my baby is that 20 milliliters fits in there. More cannot fit in there. It cannot fit in there, even when you blow it up with a balloon. And so 20 milliliters instead of 2 have come into the duodenum. And so when you measure amylin peptide in preterm neonates, they have feed intolerance. I want to say it's the other way around. They have high amylins because you gave them too big volumes. And those volumes are the cause of the high amylin. The high amylin have shut the stomach down. When you now come and take a nasogastric aspirate, you say, this baby is not tolerating its mother's milk. It's much better for it to be on formula. So you will hear about formula. So I want to suggest that actually babies do tolerate their mother's milk very well. They do not tolerate the big volumes that we have been giving them. And so you will hear later today, continuous feeding promotes better tolerance. And I must agree with this. The bolus of 2 hours is not tolerated by the baby. The continuous feeding is better tolerance of the stomach. However, the continuous feeding doesn't have the rhythmicity that I was looking for. And so how physiological is that? This is the liver here. Here is my pancreas making amylin and controlling here. But here now also we have the gallbladder. And the gallbladder is regulated by secretin and cholecystokinin and amylin and cholecystokinin. All of these work together. You heard all these names. And they're all in an orchestra, in a symphonic orchestra. Everything is in the same pitch and sound to deliver the deliverables. So here is a study which has babies having boluses, 20 mils per kilogram, which is 3 hourly. Right? But they have continuous enteral feeding for 3 days and then bolus feeding for 3 days. And what you see during the continuous feed is that the gallbladder starts expanding. There is no contraction of the gallbladder at all when you have continuous feeding. As soon as you do bolus feeding, you get an automatic return of the gallbladder emptying. And so physiologically, the boluses are necessary to help the biliary function, which is part of our absorption of fats. Finally, just one last direct picture. This Japanese study has got measurements of the fetal stomach and is measuring them every 2 minutes. Somebody volunteered for this. It wasn't my wife. It's continuous monitoring. And so what you can see on the fetal stomach is that it is having gastric peristalsis through the pylorus. And then over the course of 20 or 30 or 40 minutes, the baby swallows, and then it has gastric peristalsis. This is a endogenous ultradian rhythm of a fetal stomach at term. And it's 40 to 50 minutes. And so pleasurable feeding and sleeping, I want to suggest, has this rhythmicity of 40 to 50 minutes. And the sleep cycle has got the same rhythmicity of 50 minutes. It's one sleep cycle. Pleasurable feeding and sleeping is a single physiological rhythm. I will catch up some of your time and just show you a little story. Where is Lena Vestas? This is with the permission from your previous, from Uwe Ewald, I'm going to show your story. So, this is how the stomach grows as a fetus from 15, 18, 20, 37 weeks. I'm playing a little game and making a schematic. Let's let the baby's stomach continue growing over here. And now, if I'm giving a 1 hourly feed, that's my volume. A 4 hourly feed is up here. This is a 3 hourly feed. Just visually, can you see that there's a very sudden increase in the stomach expectation that we give those babies. But if the baby is born preterm at 25 weeks, let's say, then we give it 2 hourly, then we give it 3 hourly, and then we give it 4 hourly. And I've staggered these weights fairly carefully as a softer curve. So here is, his name is not Jacob, that's why it's in that telex, and he's getting a 2 hourly feed. And mother knows what I'm thinking, but she's very skilled at doing this feed. And so there she is, and my digital camera has a clock, so it's very nice to see exactly what's going on with the timing here. And so here she is. When half of this milk has gone in, everything has gone very smoothly. Exactly at the halfway mark, there is a bradycardia and a little apnea. And now the mother knows that she's got to slow down. And she's been taught how to do this. She's extremely skilled. She's giving the feeding. Somebody's smiling at me a little bit. So she does it, and she's been taught how to do this. And so now you get more repeated ones, but she knows exactly how much the baby can tolerate. And so at the end of this feed, it's been a very long feed that she's done. I want to suggest that even 2 hourly feeding is not pleasurable. Even 2 hourly feeds, specifically for preterm infants, come with gastric overfilling, which has a host of time, volume, and possibly adaptive outcomes that may be adverse. And so, prematures should not be fed hourly. Please never say that to me. Premature babies should be fed according to their feed intervals that are determined by sleep cycles. It is the sleep which is so important for them that they must first have, that they have adapted other metabolic functions to manage for an hour. And so sleep cycles should be the primary determinant of a single pleasurable feeding physiological rhythm of premature infants. Thank you.